In Willowbrook Heights, an upscale gated community, an ordinary summer evening turned extraordinary. Aaliyah Chen Williams, a brilliant young black woman, was calmly walking through the neighborhood, conducting what seemed to be quiet observation. To residents, she looked like a teenager with a notebook. To one man, Richard Pedden, the powerful head of the Homeowners Association, she looked suspicious. Pedden, who had filed dozens of complaints against people of color before, called the police. Officers Patterson and Hayes arrived quickly. They didn't ask many questions. They didn't review security footage or even verify her explanation that she was visiting family. Instead, they arrested her on the spot, handcuffing an 18-year-old with the poise of someone far beyond her years. Inside the courtroom days later, Pedden doubled down, claiming Aaliyah posed a threat. But his case began to unravel. Aaliyah's composure, her knowledge of procedures, and the quiet confidence in her words didn't match the image of a teenager caught where she didn't belong. Then came the shock. From the gallery, a distinguished man in his 50s stood. "Your Honor," he said, "I am Deputy Director James Chen Williams. I'm also Aaliyah's father." Gasps filled the room. He revealed that Aaliyah wasn't an ordinary young woman. She was a newly recruited CIA operative, chosen for her rare mix of intelligence, language ability, and psychological strength. Her walk through Willowbrook Heights hadn't been random. It was part of a classified field evaluation, testing her ability to assess neighborhood security. Suddenly, what looked like a routine arrest was now the exposure of a federal intelligence operation. Pedden, without realizing it, had not only racially profiled a young black woman, he had compromised national security. The courtroom revelation set off a storm no one in Willowbrook Heights had ever imagined. Judge Thompson reviewed the CIA documents presented by Aaliyah's defense, official seals, signatures, and clearance papers. They were authentic. "Mr. Pedden," the judge said slowly, "you didn't arrest a suspicious teenager. You arrested a CIA agent conducting official government business." Within hours, the fallout began. Federal investigators moved in like a quiet storm. FBI agent Maria Santos launched a civil rights investigation while the CIA's own security division reviewed the damage to Aaliyah's career. Her face had been in the news. Her cover was blown. 18 months of training for field operations were gone in an instant. At the same time, the FBI dug into Pedden's history. Out of 43 complaints he'd filed in the past year and a half, 37 had targeted people of color. Nearly all were baseless. A black man waiting on an Uber, a Latina mother accused of disturbing the peace because her kids spoke Spanish, a delivery driver cited for trespassing. None of the cases held up in court, but each cost people time, money, and dignity. Meanwhile, the CIA reviewed its own failures. Deputy Director James Chen Williams, torn between his role as father and federal official, realized his daughter's career as a covert field agent was over. She would have to be reassigned to analytical work. What had begun as one man's prejudice had destroyed one of the agency's most promising recruits. Even the officers who made the arrest faced tough questions. Internal Affairs grilled Patterson and Hayes. Why hadn't they verified Pedden's story? Why hadn't they checked the supposed surveillance footage? Their answer was blunt. She was 18. She was black. It seemed impossible she was CIA. That assumption was the real crime. In the community, the case divided residents. Some still defended Pedden. Others felt betrayed, realizing his complaints had not only harmed innocent people, but now endangered national security. At a tense neighborhood meeting, Mrs. Elena Rodriguez, retired CIA analyst and the woman who had first recommended Aaliyah for recruitment, stood tall before her neighbors. Richard Pedden's actions didn't just harm an innocent young woman. They compromised national security operations. Her words shifted the room. People began to see the truth. This wasn't just about one arrest. It was about years of prejudice weaponized through law enforcement. As the investigation deepened, the consequences spread across every level of the system that had failed Aaliyah. At the federal level, prosecutors charged Richard Pettin under civil rights law, Section 193, not just for Aaliyah's false arrest, but for a documented pattern of discriminatory complaints spanning 18 months. Each false report counted as a violation, carrying the possibility of years in prison. At home, the Willowbrook Heights Homeowners Association turned on him. In a packed emergency meeting, the board voted to strip him of all authority. An audit revealed he had secretly diverted nearly $40,000 of HOA funds for surveillance equipment and legal battles tied to his complaints. His neighbors, once his allies, now demanded restitution and criminal prosecution for embezzlement. The police department, too, faced its own reckoning. Chief Patricia Morrison held a nationally televised press conference admitting failure. "We didn't investigate properly. We didn't recognize a pattern of discriminatory reporting, and we failed to follow procedures." Officers Patterson and Hayes received formal reprimands and mandatory civil rights and de-escalation training. New protocols were introduced to verify citizen complaints before action was taken. Judge Thompson dismissed all charges against Aaliyah, calling the case a catastrophic failure of assumptions over evidence, prejudice over procedure, and discrimination over justice. His words would later be quoted in civil rights training nationwide. The most powerful shift, however, came at the community level. Residents who had once defended Pettin now had to face the uncomfortable truth. They had allowed his prejudice to shape their lives. At a reconciliation meeting led by Mrs. Rodriguez, Aaliyah herself stood before the same neighbors who had witnessed her arrest. "I don't want this to define Willowbrook Heights," she told them. "One person's prejudice created this, but your courage and accountability can define what comes next." Her steady words brought people to tears. The same teenager who had been handcuffed on suspicion of simply existing in their streets was now offering them a way forward. The fallout from Willowbrook Heights rippled far beyond the neighborhood. In Washington, Aaliyah's ordeal was studied at the Department of Justice as a model case of how racial bias intersects with local governance, policing, and federal security. Her file became required reading at the CIA Training Academy, not just for what she endured, but for how she handled it, with silence, observation, and restraint. One evening, as she reviewed mission briefs at headquarters, Deputy Director James Chen Williams stopped by her desk. "You understand now," he said softly. "The real work isn't always in foreign lands. Sometimes it's right here, in our own neighborhoods." Aaliyah nodded, her notebook open beside her. What began as humiliation had become a defining lesson, one she carried with silent strength. Months later, Willowbrook Heights no longer looked the same. The sidewalks still gleamed, the houses still shone, but something deeper had shifted. The neighborhood that once turned a blind eye now held open forums on inclusion, bias, and accountability. Children of color played freely on lawns where they once drew suspicious stares. Richard Pettin sat in a federal courtroom stripped of power and privilege. His sentencing was not just about him, but a system finally acknowledging harm. His conviction was cited in legal journals as a landmark case of community-level accountability. For Aaliyah, the journey had only begun. She returned quietly to the neighborhood one evening, not in handcuffs this time, but walking with her mother. Neighbors greeted her with nods and quiet apologies. Some approached, thanking her for her courage. Others still wrestled with shame. Aaliyah accepted both with calm grace. Later at CIA headquarters, she was honored privately in a closed-door ceremony. There were no medals or headlines, only the quiet acknowledgement of her resilience, her clarity, and her ability to remain steady under pressure. These were the qualities that defined the agency's best. Her father's words stayed with her. The real fight isn't always loud. Sometimes the strongest stand is the quiet one. And so the story of Willowbrook Heights became more than a scandal. It became a lesson in quiet power, a reminder that change doesn't always arrive with marches or speeches. Sometimes it begins with a single young woman walking calmly through a neighborhood, notebook in hand, refusing to be erased. The injustice was real, the pain undeniable. But in the end, Aaliyah's dignity reshaped not only her future, but the very system that tried to break her. She walked on, steady, unseen by most, but changing everything.